Welcome back to the series where I flipped English football upside down. We have seen a lot happening in the first 4 seasons. If you haven't yet seen those, go back and watch those on the YouTube channel. But we're here in season 5. As always, we'll start all the way down in the Vanarama National League South and North, and then we'll make our way all the way up to the Premier League, and then we'll look at the Cups and the European Cups as well. So what this means is all the Premier League teams went down to the Vanarama National League South. We haven't got many of them left here now, and as you can see in this 5th season, Fulham have finally got promoted, Bournemouth have finally got promoted. There are a few still stuck there. Watford is still stuck there, Reading is still stuck there, Brentford, Millwall, Bristol, Cardiff. But Fulham, Bournemouth, they are going up 113 points each. Fulham went up on the goal difference, but Bournemouth made it through the playoffs. At the bottom end of the table, Gosport, Hitchin, Froome and Bognor Regis all came up and are going straight back down again. Western-super-Mare also came up and have managed to stay up. Kingstonian and Wealdstone we saw drop down the divisions, but they managed to just about hold on in the division this season. Evan Ferguson was the top goal scorer for Fulham, Brian Weymouth and Jamal Lowe rounding out the top 3. In terms of transfers, the biggest ones were all out of the division. Lloyd Kelly and Rico Henry both leaving Bournemouth and Brentford respectively to both go to Maidstone for 25 million and 70 million. Maidstone, of course, we know are all the way up in the Premier League, so they're starting to buy up some of those former Premier League stars from way down in the divisions below. Bournemouth and Brentford also lost a couple other players. David Brooks and Lewis Cook both leaving Bournemouth for Sutton and Guiseley. Guiseley then picked up Finn Stevens for Brentford. Ethan Pinnock went from Brentford to Telford. Lewis Travers went from Brentford to Alfreton. So these teams are starting to lose their players to teams in the higher divisions. Todd Cantwell, for example, has left Fulham. He's left to go to Forest Green. In the National League North, West Brom and Leicester are finally promoted. West Brom is champions. Leicester through the playoffs on 97 points. Stoke, Norwich, Sheffield United, Nottingham Forest, Huddersfield, Blackburn, Hull, Derby, Preston, Barnsley, Burnley, Coventry. All these teams are still stuck here in the National League North. 4 teams that came up are going straight back down. Warrington, Biggleswade Town, Buxton and Nuneaton Borough. Fleetwood, Shrewsbury just have enough to stay up in the division. Top goal scorer is actually a regen, which is pretty good for this early on. Robbie Jones for West Brom, 20 years old. He looks pretty solid as well. Elijah Adebayo for Huddersfield and Ellis Sims rounding out the top 3. Not as many goals in this division as there were in the National League South, which is interesting. The biggest transfers out, Sunday Johnson, who is actually a regen. This is him. He looks pretty solid. He has left to go to Telford. Ivan Toney left Leicester to go to Montpellier. We've got other players like Kieran Dewsbury Hall, who's left Leicester to go to Wolves. Sammy Braybrook, who left Leicester to go to Alfreton for 9 million. So some of the younger players in these former Premier League teams are now starting to get good enough to move to now current Premier League teams. In the National League, this is where we know there's a little bit of a bottleneck because only 2 teams can go up. Everton are the winners, the champions. They spent quite a lot of money the last couple of seasons. We've seen them making some big acquisitions. Newcastle miss out, Wolves miss out, Brighton miss out. Tottenham only able to get up through the playoffs, so they beat out Newcastle, Brighton and Wolves. Leeds, Villa, Swansea, West Ham, these teams are going to be stuck here, I think, for a little while. Some of the teams holding on near the bottom as well, Crewe, Portsmouth, Bolton, Oxford, some of the teams down in League 1 and League 2 in real life. At the bottom end, Charlton, Crystal Palace, Maidenhead and Braintree find themselves relegated. You might be wondering how Crystal Palace have been relegated considering the fact they got promoted a few seasons ago. They had a 10 points deduction, but even without that 10 points deduction for administration, they still would have been relegated. They'd only managed 35 points. On the transfer front, Declan Rice finally leaves West Ham. He goes to Liverpool, but it's really cut back price, only 29 million or 35 million with add-ons. Ryan Knight-Norrie leaves Wolves for Mainz, goes for around 30 million. Ian Acho has left West Ham for PSV. Matty Cash leaves Villa for Betis. Brighton lose a couple of players to overseas teams. Moda and McAllister go to Braga and Empoli. Davison Sanchez still at Spurs goes to Sporting. So a lot of these players are leaving the division. Matty Targett has gone from Villa to Weymouth. That is one that's gone all the way up the divisions. One of the interesting things is how few Palace players we see moving on, considering the fact they went into administration this season. You might have seen them sell off a few of their assets. A couple other key signings I've spotted here. Nick Pope moves from Newcastle to Wolves. They bought him from Burnley, of course. Chris Mepham is at Man United. He's gone on to West Ham. Bamford has left Leeds for Wolves. Mason Holgate has left Leeds for Sutton. Lucas Moira has left Spurs for Newcastle. Kufau leaves West Ham for Arminia Bielefeld. Danny Ings has gone from Villa to United for just 2.8 million. There were some managerial changes. In fact, Portsmouth changed their manager twice. They brought in Sol Campbell to replace Billy Heath, and then Sol Campbell was sacked and replaced by Robbie Nelson. Palace decided to sack Gareth Southgate from fan pressure. They eventually brought in Graham Alexander. Robbie Nelson, who we saw become Portsmouth manager, was sacked from Wigan, replaced by Phil Jagielka. Then Phil Jagielka is sacked for unconfirmed reasons at Wigan. In League 2, you can see Arsenal destroyed the division, 44 wins, 2 draws, 0 losses. Southampton finishing in second, 38 wins, 4 draws, 4 losses, 118 points for them. Carlisle and Tranmere going up with them. Interesting one there is Farsley. Farsley were dropped into the Premier League at the start of this experiment. They've been dropping down the divisions, but they nearly got themselves promoted back up again. At the bottom end, St Albans and Slough find themselves going down. Top goal scorer in the division, Eddie Nketiah, 27 goals. Martial at Southampton, another 27 goals as well, joint top. And Hackford at Prmeier with 19 goals. Biggest move to the division, Kieran Tierney was sold from Arsenal to Liverpool for 31 million, 38 with add-ons. And for the most part, it's Southampton and Arsenal shifting on players. Southampton lose Thierry Small, Lyanco, Charlie Cresswell, Morgan Gibbs-White, Tieno Ballo, Greg Doherty, Luke Orford, Josh Bowler, Harvey White. They have a lot of players leaving, most of them going overseas. Some going to Telford, Darlington, Thierry Small goes to Telford for 23 million, Lyanco goes to Spezia, Charlie Cresswell goes to Darlington. The players Arsenal lose are mostly what we consider youth players right now, but some of them go for a fair bit of money. Callum O'Hare, for example, moves to Southampton for 9.25 million, which is a lot of money between two League Two teams. On a manager front, there's two interesting ones here. Former England player Carl Jenkinson has taken over as Eastleigh manager, but former England captain Wayne Rooney has taken over as the manager of Southampton from Liam Manning, who went to a new job. In League One, Manchester United go unbeaten to go up in the division, 128 points, 5 draws, 41 wins. Chelsea also got 41 wins, but they did have 2 losses. One to Cambridge and one to Manchester United. Cambridge finished in third, but they didn't manage to get promoted. Woking are the team that got promoted, 83 points for them. Down at the bottom, Dagenham, Redbridge, Stevenage, Aldershot and Port Vale will be the teams dropping down. Top goal scorer Phil Foden, yes that does read Phil Foden at Manchester United. Rob Harker and Mason Mount both getting 19 goals as well. Manchester United, despite going up, do have a little bit of an exodus. Luca Digne moves to Porto for 11 million, Udoka Godwin-Malife moves to Grimsby, Jorginho moves to Milan, Carl Jacob Heim moves to LAFC, Chris Mepham moves to West Ham, Paulinho moves to Montpellier, so they have quite a few players leaving their team. The biggest transfer in was Amaf Ndiaye from Valencia to Chelsea, but Chelsea then had to offload Mohamed Fares to Basel in exchange. Udoka Godwin-Malife was an interesting one because he was doing really well with Forest Green down in League Two, which caused Weymouth to buy him. Weymouth then sold him to Manchester United for 1.9 million when Weymouth were up in the Premier League, Manchester United down in the National League. Manchester United get promoted to League Two and League One, and while they're there, Grimsby come in and buy Godwin-Malife for 10.5 million. In the Championship, perhaps no surprise, Manchester City and Liverpool continue their ascent back up to the Premier League. They're going to be in there next season. They both lost a match. Manchester City lost their match to Liverpool and Liverpool lost their match to Bath. Ebbsfleet are the other team promoted via the playoffs. Rotherham, Spennymoor, Boston United missing out. Down at the bottom end, York, Dartford and Chester were the teams going down. All three of those teams having been in the Championship for the entirety of this run, so it means that the teams that came down last season have stayed in the division. On the transfer front, you can see there's been quite a bit of movement at Manchester City. First, they brought in quite a lot of players. Now they're in the Championship. Pedro Goncalves, they brought in from Sporting for 83 million. They paid another 82 million for Rafinha from Hoffenheim. Evanilson moved from Bayern to Liverpool for 53 million. Vitinha moves from Juve to Man City for 45 million. Ruben Neves from Inter to City for another 45 million. Sadio Mane leaves Liverpool for PSG for 39 million. Robertson leaves for Barca. Inacio comes into City for 35 million. So they're spending a lot of money. Lorenzo Luca, we know how good he can turn out in game, comes to City. Kieran Tierney, we saw, joined Liverpool. Samuel Ricci joins Man City. Nico joins Man City. Declan Rice joins Liverpool. But it has meant a little bit of an exodus as well. So Luis Diaz, not at Liverpool, at Manchester City, is sold to Barcelona for 26 million. Cole Palmer they sell, Marcus Paulo they sell, Alexander Sorloth they sell, Florian Balogun they sell. So they all have to get rid of some players to make space for these new arrivals. But it's a lot of money they spend. The biggest transfer outside those two is Max Dean, who goes from Ebbsfleet to Oxford City for 6.25 million. And in the Premier League, Sunderland have won the Premier League. Darlington, Notts County and Weymouth holding on once again to that European position. They got a Europa League position. You can see there's not quite as many Champions League positions this season as the coefficient has dropped down. Telford, Sutton, Forest Green, Rochdale, Grimsby, these teams have been up there the last few seasons. They miss out in European football. Down at the bottom end, Wrexham, Mansfield and Chippenham all drop out the division. And that's interesting because Mansfield and Wrexham started lower down in the pyramid after we flipped it, and they've made their way up to the Premier League. And the teams that are in there now are strong enough to keep themselves in the division, while Wrexham and Mansfield are dropping out. Top goal scorer was Rafa Mir for Notts County, Steffi Malvidi for Sunderland, and Tyrese Campbell with 17 goals gets third place for Telford. Biggest transfers in the division we saw, Maidstone picked up Lloyd Kelly for that 25 million. Serge Diarra moves to Darlington for 24 million. Thierry Small we saw move to Telford for 23 million. So they're starting to spend transfer budgets in the several millions. None of them spending big on famous players just yet, but I think the next few seasons we could start to see that the more they get that European football. Sunderland, I think, might be the first team to start to make some of these really big acquisitions. In the Cups, the Build-A-Base Trophy was won by Wolves. They beat Leeds in the final 2-1. Papa John's, we know this is broken. I don't know how Man City are in it, but they've won it. They've beaten Man United 3-2 after extra time. Community Shield, Notts County beat Man City 3-2. That's a really interesting result. The Carabao Cup Man City also won, they beat Grimsby. And the FA Cup was won by Manchester United on penalties over Liverpool. So Manchester United will be getting European football next year, as will Manchester City. Talking to European football, let's see how those teams who qualified last season got on in this season's Champions League, Europa League and the Europa Conference League. Before we do, I forgot to show the Club World Cup which Manchester City and Manchester United went to. They both qualified out of their group, Man City beating out Sao Paulo and Sétif, Man United beating out Lyon and the Kaiser Chiefs. But both are knocked out in the quarterfinal by German opposition, City losing to Dortmund after extra time, Manchester United losing to Bayern. It's Juve who go on to win the tournament, beating PSG. In the Europa Conference League, Liverpool had to go in at the 4th qualifying round. They beat out Desna 5-0 on aggregate. In the group stage, they were in a group with Standard Liège, Tbilisi and Tiraspol. They beat them all 6 wins out of 6. Liverpool easily through their group, which means they got to pass to the second knockout round. They beat Trabzon 7-1 on aggregate. In the quarterfinal, they beat St Gallen 4-2 on aggregate. Semi-final, they beat Osasuna 5-1 on aggregate. And in the final, they came up against Lazio and Paris, who they beat 1-0. So Liverpool win the Europa Conference League, so even though they didn't win any of the domestic cups, they still get Europa League football next season. In the Europa League, you can see Mansfield joined into Group C, where they actually got 2 wins, 2 draws and a loss, and that was enough to see them through into the first knockout round. Manchester City also, they got 6 wins out of 6 in their group, in Group F, so they also went through. But in that first knockout round, Mansfield came up against Valencia and lost 6-1 on aggregate. Man City went straight through to the second knockout round where they beat Celta Vigo 7-0. They then beat Sporting 4-2 on aggregate in the quarterfinal, but they also were knocked out by Valencia 3-2 on aggregate in the semi-final. And Valencia lost to Wolfsburg 2-1 in the final, so Wolfsburg won the Europa League. In the Champions League, you can see Weymouth were in a group with Real Madrid, Bayern and Sporting. Of course, they did not win a match, but only -11 goal difference, so it's not the worst. It means they didn't concede that many goals in their matches, but it does mean they dropped out of Europe without a win. Rochdale were in a group with Inter, Genk and Besiktas, maybe a bit of an easier group. They managed to get 1 draw and they lost the other 5 matches, but again, they drop out. Notts County in a group with Barcelona, Stuttgart and Dynamo Kiev. They didn't do too bad. They got 1 win and 3 draws, only 2 losses, but it wasn't enough to get them enough points to stay in the Champions League or get that 3rd spot in the Europa League. Dynamo Kiev having the head-to-head result against them, meaning Dynamo Kiev pipped them to 3rd spot and get in the Europa League. And Grimsby in a group with AC Milan, Borussia Dortmund and Benfica. They didn't win a single match, -14 goal difference. They also got knocked straight out of the Champions League. PSG went on to win the tournament, beating out Leipzig 1-0 in the final of the Champions League. If you're curious what happened in the 2030 World Cup, England were in Group H with Venezuela and Mali. They won both those matches. In the second round, they beat the Ivory Coast, but they lost to Belgium in the 3rd round 2-1. Italy went on to win the tournament in the US, beating the Netherlands in extra time 1-0. So that's the state of English football 5 seasons after I flipped it upside down. It's going to be really interesting to see just how Liverpool and City get on next season. They have put a lot of money into those teams, so you can expect them to be really pushing for the top of that Premier League. I think they're probably one of those two is probably going to win it. They're going to be the top 2, surely. Sunderland 3rd, we'll see. We'll see how Sunderland get on in Europe. I can see Sunderland spending a bit of money. Weymouth are still holding on there. They have European football again next season. Let's see if they can pick up on better results in the coming season. This will be the 3rd or 4th season in European football. Will we see teams like Grimsby, Notts County solidify themselves in the Premier League before those former Premier League teams make it back to the Premier League? If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe down below. It lets me know that you're enjoying the Flip series, you want to know more, you really want to see what's happening, and the more that I see that people are enjoying it, the more likely I am to put out the next video. So make sure you hit that like button. Come over and check out the TikTok as well, because over on TikTok I will take requests for teams that you want me to look at in particular, look at their transfers, look at how they're doing, updates on how they're doing, and mini updates on the leagues and the cups as well. But why not stay here on YouTube and check out this other video I did to see where Ronaldo should have moved this summer, testing it out in Football Manager at different clubs.